Admiral Jake Morrison stood on the bridge of the UES Phoenix and looked out at the stars. Behind his ship, 199 other human vessels waited in the darkness of space. They had traveled far from Earth to reach this place. Very far indeed. The bridge was quiet except for the soft hum of computers and life support systems. Officers worked at their stations, checking weapons and shields one last time. Everyone knew what was coming. They had all heard the Empire's message 3 days ago. Captain Lisa Hayes walked up to Morrison with a data pad in her hands. She had been his second-in-command for 5 years now. They had fought together in the Outer Rim wars against pirates and raiders. But this was different. This was bigger than anything they had ever faced. "Sir, we're getting the final reports from our scouts," Hayes said. "The Zentari system has over 2,000 Imperial ships, maybe more." Morrison nodded. He had expected this. The Galactic Empire did not make threats they could not back up. For 300 years they had ruled most of the known galaxy. Hundreds of alien species bowed to their power. Their fleets were massive, their weapons were deadly, their ships were built to last for centuries. "What about the defense platforms?" Morrison asked. 12 orbital stations around Zentari Prime. Each one has enough firepower to destroy a small fleet. Hayes paused. "Admiral, are you sure about this? We could still turn back. We could try to negotiate." Morrison looked at her. Hayes was a good officer. She was also a good friend. But she did not understand what was really at stake here. None of them did. Not really. 3 weeks ago, the Empire had sent their ultimatum to Earth. The message was simple and clear. Humanity would give up all colonies beyond the solar system. They would pay taxes to the Empire. They would accept Imperial law and Imperial rule. If they refused, the Empire would send fleets to force them to obey. The message had caused panic on Earth and the human colonies. Some politicians wanted to surrender immediately. Others wanted to fight. The debates went on for days. Meanwhile, the Empire's deadline grew closer. Morrison had not waited for the politicians to decide. He had gathered every ship he could find. Warships, cargo vessels, mining ships, even some passenger liners that had been fitted with weapons. 200 ships in total. It was the largest human fleet ever assembled. It was also tiny compared to what the Empire could send against them. "No, negotiations," Morrison said finally. "They want us to surrender everything our people have built. Every colony, every station, every dream of freedom among the stars. I won't do it." Hayes nodded. She understood his feelings even if she thought they were hopeless. The communications officer turned around in his chair. "Admiral, we're receiving a transmission from the Imperial fleet. They want to talk." "Put it on the main screen," Morrison ordered. The view screen flickered and then showed the bridge of an Imperial warship. The alien who appeared was tall and thin, with blue-gray skin and large dark eyes. His uniform was covered with medals and decorations. This was Admiral Vextar, Supreme Commander of the Empire's naval forces. "So," Vextar said, his voice filled with amusement. "The humans have come to play war games. How interesting." Morrison stepped forward. "I am Admiral Jake Morrison of the Human Expeditionary Fleet. We're here to deliver a message." "A message?" Vextar laughed. It was not a pleasant sound. "You bring 200 small ships to face my fleet of 2,000, and you want to deliver a message? This should be entertaining." Behind Vextar, other Imperial officers could be seen. They were all smiling or making sounds that might have been laughter. To them, this was a joke. Humans were a young species, barely 500 years in space. They had no real military power. They had never fought a major war against anyone except themselves. "Your Emperor sent us an ultimatum," Morrison said. "He demanded our surrender. He threatened our people. He wants to make us slaves." "Slaves is such an ugly word," Vextar replied. "We prefer to think of it as bringing order to chaos. Your species is young and foolish. You need guidance. The Empire has brought peace and stability to hundreds of worlds. Peace through conquest, stability through fear, results through strength. Your people will be happier once they accept their place in the natural order of things. Vexitar leaned forward. I will give you one chance, Admiral Morrison. Surrender now and your crews will be treated well. Continue this foolishness and you will all die. Your choice. Morrison was quiet for a long moment. Around him, his bridge crew waited. In the ships behind him, thousands of human men and women waited. On Earth and the colonies, billions more waited to hear what would happen next. The Empire had ruled the galaxy for 3 centuries. Their technology was advanced. Their fleets were huge. Their power seemed unlimited. Every species that had ever challenged them had been crushed. The smart thing to do was surrender. The reasonable thing was to accept the ultimatum and hope for mercy. But Morrison thought about the human colonies. He thought about families who had traveled to distant stars to build new lives. He thought about children born under alien suns who had never seen Earth but still called themselves human. He thought about the dreams and hopes of his entire species. Admiral Vexitar, Morrison said clearly. This is Admiral Jake Morrison of the Human Expeditionary Fleet. We reject your ultimatum. We reject your authority. We reject your empire. The Imperial officers stopped laughing. As of this moment, Morrison continued, humanity declares total war against the Galactic Empire. We will not stop until every Imperial ship is destroyed. We will not rest until every Imperial world is free. We will fight until your tyranny ends forever. The silence on the Imperial bridge was complete. Vexitar stared at Morrison as if he could not believe what he had heard. Total war? Vexitar finally said. You cannot be serious. No species has ever declared total war against the Empire. Do you have any idea what that means? It means we fight until one of us is completely destroyed, Morrison replied. It means no surrender, no retreat, no mercy. It means we keep fighting until we win or until there are no humans left to fight. You will all die, Vexitar said. His voice was no longer amused. I have 2,000 ships. You have 200. The mathematics are simple. Mathematics don't account for everything, Morrison said. Sometimes the side that should lose finds a way to win. Sometimes fighting for something you believe in makes you stronger than you thought possible. Foolish human philosophy, Vexitar sneered. Prepare to learn the price of defying the Empire. The transmission ended. The view screen went dark. Morrison turned to his crew. Every face was looking at him. Some showed fear. Others showed determination. All of them showed trust in his leadership. All ships, Morrison said into his communicator. This is Admiral Morrison. Battle stations. Prepare for combat. Today we show the galaxy that humanity will not kneel. Today we show them what happens when you push humans too far. Across the human fleet, alarms began to sound. Weapons powered up. Shields activated. 200 ships prepared to face 2,000. The Galactic Empire was about to learn something new about humans. They were going to learn that sometimes the impossible was just another word for what humans had not done yet. The Battle of Centauri Prime began exactly as Admiral Vexitar expected it would. His massive Imperial fleet moved forward in perfect formation. 2,000 ships advancing like a wall of metal and death. The humans would see this display of power and realize their mistake. They would try to run, and then his ships would hunt them down one by one. Vexitar stood on the bridge of his flagship, the Eternal Dominion. The ship was 3 kilometers long and carried enough weapons to destroy a small moon. Around him, his officers prepared for what they expected to be a short battle. Target their lead ships, Vexitar ordered. Full power. I want to make an example of them. The Imperial fleet opened fire. Thousands of energy beams and missiles streaked across space toward the human ships. The display was beautiful and terrible. Enough firepower to level a planet flew through the darkness. But something was wrong. The human ships were not where they were supposed to be. Sir, reported the weapons officer, we're not hitting them. They're moving too fast. Vexitar frowned. He looked at the tactical display. The human ships were indeed moving faster than expected. Much faster. They were also smaller than Imperial intelligence had reported. Instead of the large, slow battleships that most species used, the humans had brought fast destroyers and cruisers. Adjust. Targeting, Vexitar ordered. compensate for their speed. But before his gunners could react, the human ships did something no one expected. They split up. Captain Ben Cooper commanded a squadron of human stealth frigates. His ships were small and fast, built for hit-and-run attacks. They had been hiding in the shadow of larger vessels, invisible to Imperial sensors. "All ships, this is Cooper," he said over the radio. "Execute shadow strike. Hit them hard and fast." The stealth frigates appeared on Imperial sensors just as they opened fire. Their weapons were not as powerful as the Empire's, but they were accurate. Cooper's ships targeted the engines and weapon systems of the nearest Imperial cruisers. 3 enemy ships lost power and began to drift. "What in the void was that?" Vextar demanded. "Unknown ships, sir. They appeared from nowhere." "Ships don't appear from nowhere. Find them and destroy them." But Cooper's frigates had already vanished again, disappearing into the chaos of the battle. The Imperials tried to track them, but the small ships moved too quickly and used too many tricks. Meanwhile, Commander Amy Parker was coordinating something the Empire had never seen before. Her missile cruisers launched thousands of small rockets, but these were not normal missiles. They split apart as they flew, each one becoming 10 smaller warheads. The Imperial point defense systems could not track them all. "Incoming missile. Swarm," reported an Imperial officer. "Estimated count. Sir, I'm reading over 50,000 individual targets." Vextar stared at the display. 50,000 missiles from just 20 human ships? It was impossible. His fleet had better technology. His ships were larger and more powerful. This should not be happening. "All ships, maximum defensive fire," he ordered. The Imperial fleet tried to shoot down the incoming missiles, but there were too many. The small warheads got through and began hitting their targets. The damage was not severe, but it was widespread. Dozens of Imperial ships reported system failures. But the biggest shock came when Captain Joe Martinez did something that no Imperial commander had ever seen. Martinez commanded the destroyer UES Valor. His ship had taken heavy damage from Imperial fire. The engines were failing, the weapons were offline, and the hull was breached in 12 places. By all military logic, he should have surrendered or retreated. Instead, Martinez ordered full speed ahead. "Sir," his weapons officer said, "we're heading straight for their flagship." "I know," Martinez replied calmly. "All hands, prepare for ramming speed. Set the fusion reactor to overload on my command." The Valor accelerated toward the Eternal. Dominion like a missile. Imperial gunners tried to stop it, but the small ship was too fast and too determined. It crashed into the flagship's hangar bay and exploded. The blast tore a massive hole in the side of Vextar's ship. Alarms screamed. Emergency bulkheads sealed, but the damage was done. The Eternal Dominion was wounded. "Damage report," Vextar demanded. "Hangar bay destroyed. Decks 14 through 22 are open to space. We've lost 40% of our fighter craft." Vextar could not believe it. The human captain had deliberately destroyed his own ship to damage the flagship. It was suicide. It was madness. It was also effective. "Sir," another officer reported, "we're getting similar reports from across the fleet. The humans are ramming damaged ships into our vessels. We've lost 8 ships to kamikaze attacks." "They're all crazy," Vextar muttered. But the humans were not finished. Admiral Morrison had been watching the battle from the bridge of the Phoenix. He saw his ships taking damage. He saw the Imperial fleet trying to surround them. He also saw something the Imperials had not noticed yet. "All ships," Morrison said calmly, "execute slingshot maneuver. Use their own gravity wells against them." The human fleet had been studying Imperial tactics for months. They knew that the Empire's large ships created gravity fields that could be used for navigation. What the Imperials did not realize was that humans had learned to use these same fields as weapons. Captain Ryan Kelly commanded a squadron of modified cargo ships. These vessels had been fitted with kinetic bombardment systems. They used the gravity fields of the Imperial ships to accelerate metal slugs to incredible speeds. "Firing solution locked," Kelly reported. "Kinetic bombardment ready." "Fire," Morrison ordered. The cargo ships launched their weapons. Simple metal rods accelerated by gravity and momentum to a significant fraction of light speed. They hit the Imperial ships like the hammer of an angry god. The first kinetic strike punched completely through an Imperial battleship. The second destroyed a cruiser's bridge. The third and fourth strikes hit a troop transport and turned it into expanding debris. "What are they shooting at us?" Vextar demanded. "Metal rods, sir. Just chunks of iron and steel." "That's impossible. Simple kinetic weapons can't penetrate our shields." But they were penetrating. The humans had done the mathematics. They understood that any shield could be overwhelmed with enough kinetic energy. They had turned simple physics into a devastating weapon. The battle continued for 6 hours. The Imperial fleet had every advantage. Better ships, better weapons, better shields, and 10 times as many vessels. But the humans fought like nothing the Empire had ever encountered. When Imperial ships formed up in defensive formations, human ships appeared behind them using micro-jumps. When Imperial commanders tried to negotiate, human captains responded with weapons fire. When Imperial ships tried to retreat, human vessels pursued them relentlessly. Captain Luke Davis commanded a squadron of fast attack craft. His ships were barely larger than fighters, but they carried enough firepower to threaten much larger vessels. Davis led his squadron through the Imperial formation like wolves hunting in a pack. "Target their communication arrays," Davis ordered. "Blind them and confuse them." The attack craft swarmed over an Imperial dreadnought, their weapons targeting sensors and communication equipment. Within minutes, the massive ship could not coordinate with the rest of the fleet. "Sir," Davis's wingman reported, "enemy fighters, incoming." "Let them come," Davis replied. "We'll show them how humans fight in small ships." The dogfight that followed became legendary. Human pilots, flying smaller and faster ships, outmaneuvered the Imperial fighters. They used tactics that ignored traditional rules of engagement. They sacrificed themselves to protect their wingmen. They rammed enemy ships when their weapons ran out. When the battle finally ended, Admiral Vextar looked at his damage reports and could not believe what he was reading. His fleet had lost 312 ships. The humans had lost only 47. "How?" he asked his staff. "How did 200 ships defeat 2,000? "Sir," his intelligence officer reported, "the humans don't fight like any species we've encountered. They ignore casualties. They use unconventional tactics. They sacrifice individual ships to damage our formations. They're not fighting a war," Vextar realized. "They're fighting a crusade." On the bridge of the Phoenix, Admiral Morrison received his own casualty reports. 47 ships lost, over 3,000 human lives. Each loss hurt, but the victory was clear. "Sir," Captain Hayes reported, "we're receiving messages from across the galaxy. News of our victory is spreading faster than Imperial sensors can stop it." Morrison nodded. This was just the beginning. The Empire would send more ships. They would bring their allies. They would try to crush humanity with overwhelming force. But something had changed. For the first time in 300 years, the Galactic Empire had been defeated in open battle. The impossible had happened. A small fleet had beaten a large one through superior tactics, determination, and the willingness to sacrifice everything for victory. "Send a message to Earth," Morrison ordered. "Tell them we won the first battle. Tell them to prepare for the real war." The Battle of Zentari Prime was over. The Galactic War was just beginning. News of the human victory at Zentari Prime spread across the galaxy like wildfire. Imperial censors tried to stop the reports, but it was too late. On 1,000 worlds, people whispered the impossible truth. Humans had defeated an Imperial fleet. The Empire could be beaten. Admiral Morrison stood in the communication center of the Phoenix, reading reports from across human space. The victory had cost them dearly, but it had also awakened something in humanity that even he had not expected. "Sir," Captain Hayes said, walking up with another data pad, "we're getting messages from every human colony. They want to help." Morrison looked at the pad. Lists of ships, supplies, and volunteers filled the screen. Mining barges from the asteroid fields. Cargo ships from the trade routes. Even passenger liners were being converted into warships.
"How many ships are we talking about?" Morrison asked. "Over 5,000 so far, sir, and more keep coming." Morrison shook his head in amazement. When he had left Earth with 200 ships, he thought he was leading humanity's entire military
force. Now he realized he had only been leading the first wave. Captain Ryan Kelly was already seeing the results. His flotilla of converted civilian ships had grown from 20 vessels to over 300. Miners who had spent their lives digging metal from asteroids were now using their skills to build weapons. Traders who had carried goods between the stars were now carrying supplies to the human fleet. "Admiral," Kelly reported over the radio, "the civilian volunteers are asking what they should do. Most of them have never been in a real fight." "Tell them to follow orders and watch the veterans," Morrison replied. "They'll learn fast enough." The Empire was learning something too. In the Imperial capital, Emperor Zarthak sat in his throne room listening to reports from his military commanders. The news was not good. "How many ships do the humans have now?" the Emperor asked. "Our intelligence estimates between 5 and 10,000 vessels, Your Majesty," Admiral Vextar replied. His flagship had been repaired after the battle, but his confidence had not. "The number keeps growing. 10,000 ships from a species that barely had 200 a month ago. How is this possible?" "They are converting every vessel they can find, Majesty. Cargo ships, mining vessels, even pleasure craft. Their entire civilization has become a military factory." The Emperor was silent for a long moment. In 300 years of imperial rule, no species had ever shown this kind of determination. Most civilizations fought with their official military forces. When those were defeated, they surrendered. Humans seemed to be fighting with their entire population. "What about their manufacturing capability?" the Emperor asked. Vextar's expression grew even more troubled. "That is our biggest problem, Majesty. Human shipyards are producing vessels at an incredible rate. Our ships are better built and more durable, but theirs are faster to make and easier to replace." The difference was becoming clear across human space. While imperial shipyards spent years crafting beautiful, expensive vessels designed to last for centuries, human factories were pumping out functional warships as quickly as possible. They were not pretty, but they worked. Commander Kate Phillips oversaw one of the largest human shipyards at New Detroit. The facility had been expanded 3 times since the war began. What had once been a small repair dock was now a massive construction center. "How many ships can we deliver this month?" Phillips asked her chief engineer. 40 destroyers, 15 cruisers, and about 100 support vessels," he replied. "We could do more if we had more raw materials. The mining colonies are sending everything they can. We'll make do." Phillips walked through the construction bay, watching welders and technicians work around the clock. These were not professional shipbuilders. They were mechanics, factory workers, and volunteers who had learned their skills in a matter of weeks. But they were building ships that could fight. The war was spreading beyond single battles. Human strike forces began appearing throughout Imperial space, attacking targets that the Empire had thought were safe. Communication relays went silent. Supply convoys disappeared. Remote outposts sent distress calls that were never answered. Captain Luke Davis commanded one of these deep strike forces. His squadron of fast ships moved through Imperial territory like ghosts, hitting targets and vanishing before the Empire could respond. "Target acquired," Davis reported to his squadron. "Imperial supply depot, lightly defended, standard raid pattern." The human ships dropped out of hyperspace near an Imperial supply station. The facility was huge, designed to support entire fleets. It was also almost undefended. The Empire had never needed to protect supply lines deep in their own territory. Davis's ships attacked with brutal efficiency. They destroyed the station's defenses, captured what supplies they could carry, and demolished the rest. The entire raid took less than an hour. "Sir," Davis's communications officer reported, "we're receiving a message from the station commander. He wants to surrender." Davis thought about it. Taking prisoners would slow them down, but it would also send a message to other Imperial commanders. "Accept his surrender," Davis decided. "But make sure he understands something. Tell him that humanity doesn't want to conquer the Empire. We want to destroy it. There's a difference." This was the Empire's second shock. Humans were not fighting for territory or resources. They were fighting to completely eliminate Imperial power. Every ship they captured was either converted to human use or destroyed. Every station they took was either used as a base or demolished. They were not trying to replace the Empire. They were trying to erase it. The Empire's response was predictable and terrible. If humans would not follow the normal rules of war, then the Empire would not either. Imperial fleets began targeting human civilian installations. Colonies were bombed from orbit. Space stations were destroyed with everyone aboard. Prisoners were executed publicly. The Imperial commanders thought this would break human morale. They were wrong. Every atrocity made humans fight harder. Every civilian death created 10 new volunteers for the human fleet. Every act of Imperial cruelty was broadcast across human space, strengthening the resolve of people who had never thought they would become warriors. Commander Susan Clark had been a civilian journalist before the war. Now she ran the human propaganda, broadcast that the Empire could not stop. "People of the galaxy," Clark said into her microphone, "the Empire wants you to believe that resistance is hopeless. They want you to think that their power cannot be challenged. But we are here to tell you the truth. The Empire can be beaten. We are beating them." Clark's broadcasts reached every corner of Imperial space. On occupied worlds, resistance movements began to listen. The Empire's member species, bound by treaties and fear, started to question whether Imperial rule was really eternal. The first cracks appeared in the Empire's alliance structure. The Veltari, who had been conquered 3 centuries ago, began to remember their lost independence. Secret messages started flowing between Veltari commanders and human forces. "Admiral Morrison," Hayes reported, "we're receiving a coded transmission from a Veltari fleet commander. He wants to meet." Morrison studied the message. This could be a trap, but it could also be an opportunity. If the Empire's allies started to doubt their loyalty, the war could change dramatically. "Set up the meeting," Morrison decided. "But keep our guard up. This could go either way." The meeting took place on a neutral space station at the edge of Imperial territory. Admiral Morrison met with Commander Thalvar of the Veltari Imperial Navy. The alien was tall and thin with green skin and large eyes that showed both hope and fear. "Admiral Morrison," Thalvar said carefully, "my people have been watching your war with great interest." "And what do you think of what you've seen?" Morrison asked. "I think that for the first time in 3 centuries, the Empire looks vulnerable. I think that maybe, just maybe, there is hope for species like mine who dream of freedom." Morrison nodded. This was what he had hoped to hear. "Commander, humanity didn't start this war to build our own empire. We started it because we believe that all intelligent species have the right to determine their own fate. And if we helped you, what would happen to the Veltari after the war? You would be free to govern yourselves, just like any other independent species. No tribute, no imperial oversight, no masters at all." Thalvar was quiet for a long time. Finally he spoke. "I cannot speak for all Veltari commanders, but I can speak for my own fleet. We are tired of fighting other people's wars. We are tired of enforcing imperial will on innocent worlds." "What are you saying, Commander?" "I am saying that when next we meet in battle, Admiral Morrison, my ships will not fire on yours. I cannot promise more than that, but I can promise that much." Morrison extended his hand. "That's more than enough, Commander. Welcome to the revolution." The handshake between a human admiral and a Veltari commander marked the beginning of something new. The Empire's iron grip on the galaxy was starting to slip. One by one, the subject species were beginning to remember what freedom meant. Back on Zentari Prime, Admiral Vextar received reports of increasing unrest throughout Imperial space. Ships were deserting, colonies were rebelling. Trade routes were being abandoned as merchant captains decided that carrying Imperial cargo was too dangerous. "Sir," his intelligence officer reported, The rebellion spread like a virus through the Empire's body. What had started as humanity's desperate fight for survival was becoming something much larger. On worlds that had been conquered centuries ago, people began to remember what freedom looked like. Admiral Morrison stood on the bridge of the Phoenix, watching a sight that no one had thought possible 6 months ago. Through the view screen, he could see ships from dozens of different species flying together under human command. Veltari cruisers flew alongside human destroyers. Catherine fighters escorted converted cargo ships. Even some former Imperial vessels had joined the growing fleet. "Sir," Captain Hayes reported, "we're receiving word from the Rigel system. Admiral Thalvar's entire fleet has officially declared for the rebellion. That's over 300 ships." Morrison nodded. Thalvar had been true to his word. The Veltari commander had not just stopped fighting humans. He had turned his weapons against his former Imperial masters. The defection had happened during a battle near Rigel Station. Imperial forces had been trying to retake a human-held supply depot when Thalvar's fleet arrived as reinforcements. Instead of attacking the humans, the Veltari ships had opened fire on the Imperial fleet. Captain Nick Taylor had been commanding the human defense when it happened. He found himself in the strange position of fighting alongside alien ships that had been his enemies just hours before. "This is Admiral Thalvar to all human vessels," the message had come over the radio. "We are no longer servants of the Empire. We fight now for freedom, for all species." The battle had ended with a complete Imperial defeat. More importantly, it had shown the galaxy that the Empire's hold on its member species was breaking. News reached every corner of Imperial space within days. On the industrial world of Catherine Prime, factory workers began to sabotage Imperial weapon production. On the agricultural planet of Zarthak, farmers stopped sending food shipments to Imperial forces. On the mining world of Veltar, entire communities rose up and expelled their Imperial governors. Ambassador Susan Clark was no longer just broadcasting to humans. Her messages now reached millions of beings across hundreds of worlds. "Citizens of the galaxy," Clark said from her hidden transmitter, "the Empire wants you to believe that rebellion is hopeless. They want you to think that their power is eternal. But we have proven them wrong. Species after species is choosing freedom over slavery. The Empire's time is ending." The message was translated into dozens of languages and broadcast on frequencies that Imperial sensors could not block. On worlds where speaking against the Empire meant death, people listened in secret and began to hope. Emperor Zarthak paced in his throne room like a caged animal. Reports flooded in from across his domain, each one worse than the last. The humans were no longer his only problem. Half the galaxy was in revolt. "How many systems have we lost?" the Emperor demanded. "Over 200, Your Majesty," Admiral Vextar replied. His face was grim. "And the number grows daily. It's not just military defeats. Entire populations are rejecting Imperial authority. What about our allies? Surely some species remain loyal." "The Zephyrians are still with us, as are the Karathi. But even among our strongest supporters, there are reports of unrest." The Emperor slammed his fist on the arm of his throne. How did this happen? How did a minor human rebellion become a galactic revolution? Vextar had been asking himself the same question. The answer was disturbing. "The humans fight differently, Majesty. They don't just want to defeat us. They want to free everyone we've conquered. Every species they liberate becomes another ally. Every world they free becomes another base." This was the Empire's third shock. Humans were not trying to replace Imperial rule with human rule. They were trying to eliminate the concept of Empire entirely. Captain Helen Brooks had been put in charge of liberation operations. Her mixed fleet of human ships and alien defectors specialized in freeing occupied worlds. The tactics they used were unlike anything the Empire had prepared for. "Target analysis complete," Brooks announced to her fleet. "Veltar Prime has 3 orbital defense platforms and a garrison of 5,000 Imperial troops. The civilian population is approximately 50 million. Brooks's fleet did not attack the defense platforms first, as Imperial doctrine would suggest. Instead, they broadcast messages directly to the planet's surface. "People of Veltar," Brooks said over all frequencies, "this is Captain Helen Brooks of the Liberation Fleet. We are here to free your world. We know that many of you have family members serving in the Imperial garrison. We do not want to hurt them. Imperial soldiers who surrender will be treated fairly and allowed to return to their home worlds." The broadcast was repeated in the Veltari language. On the planet below, People who had lived under imperial occupation for 3 centuries heard something they had never expected to hear. An offer of freedom without the demand for revenge. The effect was immediate. Inside the imperial garrison, Veltari soldiers began to question their orders. Why were they defending occupiers against liberators? Why were they fighting against their own people's freedom? The first imperial position to surrender was a communication relay staffed entirely by local conscripts, then a supply depot, then an entire military base. Within 6 hours, most of the imperial forces on Veltar Prime had either surrendered or joined the rebellion. The orbital defense platforms held out for 2 more days before their crews, mostly Veltari technicians, shut down the weapons and opened the docking bays to liberation forces. When the liberation of Veltar Prime was complete, Brooks did something that amazed both humans and aliens. She left. "Sir," her second-in-command asked, "aren't we going to occupy the planet? Set up a human administration?" "No," Brooks replied. "We came here to free these people, not to rule them. They can govern themselves." The Liberation Fleet departed, leaving behind only a small communication station and some defensive equipment. Veltar Prime was free to determine its own future. News of the liberation spread across the galaxy. For the first time in 3 centuries, an occupied world had been freed and then left to govern itself. The concept was so foreign to imperial thinking that many species could barely understand it, but they wanted it. The cascade of defections accelerated. The Kethran Confederacy, bound to the Empire by ancient treaties, secretly began supplying human forces with intelligence and equipment. The Zarthak mining guilds, tired of sending their wealth to imperial coffers, started providing resources and safe harbors to liberation fleets. Even individual imperial commanders began to question their loyalty. Captain Marcus Webb had been born on Earth but had joined the Imperial Navy years before the war began. When his cruiser was ordered to bombard a human colony, he faced an impossible choice. "Sir," his weapons officer reported, "we have firing solutions on the civilian targets." Webb stared at the tactical display. Below them was New Geneva, a human farming colony with no military value. The orbital bombardment would kill thousands of innocent people, including children. "Sir? Your orders?" Webb thought about his oath to the Empire. Then he thought about his oath as a human being. "Stand down weapons," Webb ordered. "All stop." "Sir?" I said, "Stand down. Send a message to the colony. Tell them to evacuate, then send a message to the liberation forces. Tell them where to find us." Within hours, Webb's cruiser had joined the growing liberation fleet. His crew, mostly humans who had been forced to serve the Empire, welcomed the chance to fight for their own species. The defections were not limited to humans serving in Imperial forces. Aliens throughout the galaxy were making similar choices. The Empire's power had been based on the belief that resistance was hopeless. Once that belief was shattered, the entire system began to collapse. Colonel Pete Wilson had been tasked with training alien resistance fighters. On dozens of worlds, local populations were organizing militias and guerrilla forces. Wilson's job was to teach them how to fight effectively. "The key is not to face Imperial forces directly," Wilson explained to a group of Veltari rebels. "Hit their supply lines, disrupt their communications, make them afraid to leave their bases." The training was working. Imperial forces throughout the galaxy found themselves fighting not just human fleets in space, but local rebellions on every occupied world. Commander Julia Foster managed the logistics of this growing rebellion. Her network of supply ships and communication relays spanned multiple star systems. Weapons flowed to resistance fighters. Food and medical supplies reached refugee populations. Information traveled faster than Imperial forces could intercept it. "Sir," Foster reported to Morrison, "we're receiving requests for aid from over 400 resistance groups. They're asking for everything from weapons to medical supplies to communication equipment." Morrison studied the reports. The rebellion had grown far beyond anything he had imagined when he first declared war on the Empire. Humans were no longer fighting alone, they were leading a galactic revolution. "Give them whatever they need," Morrison decided. This stopped being about human independence months ago. Now it's about freedom for everyone. The Empire's response was desperate and brutal. Unable to fight the rebellion militarily, they turned to terrorism. Imperial forces began targeting civilian populations, hoping to break the will of the resistance through fear. It had the opposite effects. The final battle did not take place where anyone expected. Emperor Zarthak had withdrawn his remaining forces to the fortress world of Zarthak Prime, the true heart of Imperial power. The planet was protected by orbital defense platforms that had never been defeated in 3 centuries of Imperial rule. Admiral Morrison stood on the bridge of the Phoenix, looking at the tactical display. Around him, the Liberation Fleet had grown beyond all recognition. Millions of ships from hundreds of species filled space as far as sensors could reach. What had started as 200 human vessels was now the largest military force in galactic history. "Final count, sir," Captain Hayes reported. "We have over 3 million ships ready for battle. Humans, Veltari, Kethrin, Zarthak, and 47 other species." Morrison shook his head in amazement. When he had first declared war on the Empire, he had hoped to buy time for humanity to prepare better defenses. He had never imagined leading a galactic revolution. "What about Imperial forces?" Morrison asked. "Intelligence estimates they have about 500,000 ships defending Zarthak Prime. Their best remaining forces plus mercenary fleets from neutral systems." 500,000 ships was still a massive force, but it was a fraction of what the Empire had commanded at the beginning of the war. Most of their fleets had been destroyed, defected, or were trapped defending rebellious worlds. The siege of Zarthak Prime began not with massive battles, but with words. Commander Mary Johnson, now in charge of Liberation Communications, broadcast a message to the Imperial defenders. "Soldiers of the Empire," Johnson said, "you are defending a system that has brought nothing but suffering to the galaxy. You fight for masters who see you as disposable tools. We offer you a choice. Surrender now and you will be treated with honor. Join us, and you can help build a better future for all species." The message was repeated in dozens of languages. On Imperial ships throughout the defense fleet, soldiers began to ask themselves why they were fighting. Many of them came from worlds that had been conquered by the Empire. They were fighting to preserve the system that had enslaved their own people. The first defections came within hours. A squadron of Karathi frigates simply stopped responding to Imperial commands and moved to join the Liberation Fleet. Then a wing of Zephyrian fighters. Then an entire battle group of mixed alien crews. Emperor Zarthak watched the defections from his command center deep beneath the planet's surface. Each ship that changed sides was another piece of his empire crumbling away. "Sir," his communication officer reported, "Admiral Morrison is requesting to speak with you directly." The Emperor stared at the communication panel. 6 months ago, Jake Morrison had been the commander of a small human fleet. Now he was the leader of a galactic revolution. How had it come to this? "Put him through," the Emperor said. Morrison's face appeared on the screen. He looked older than he had at the beginning of the war, but his eyes were still determined. "Emperor Zarthak," Morrison said formally, "I'm calling to offer you one final chance to end this war peacefully." "And what are your terms, Admiral?" "Complete surrender of all Imperial forces, independence for all member species, reparations for damaged worlds, and guarantees that the Empire will never again threaten free peoples." The Emperor was quiet for a moment. These were harsh terms, but they were not unreasonable. Morrison was not demanding the destruction of the Imperial species or the execution of Imperial leaders. He was simply demanding an end to Imperial rule. "And if I refuse?" the Emperor asked. Morrison's expression did not change. "Then we continue this war until the Empire ceases to exist. We've come this far, Emperor. Do you really think we'll stop now?" The truth was obvious to both of them. The Liberation Fleet had enough ships to turn Zarthak Prime into rubble. They had enough firepower to destroy every Imperial ship in the system. More importantly, they had the will to do it. "I need time to consider your terms," the Emperor said. "You have 48 hours, Morrison replied. "After that, we begin our final assault." The transmission ended. The Emperor looked around his command center at the faces of his remaining advisors. They all knew that the Empire was finished. The only question was whether it would end with negotiation or destruction. The 48 hours passed slowly. On both sides, soldiers prepared for what might be the final battle of the war. Imperial forces readied their defenses. Liberation forces checked their weapons and said their prayers. Captain Ben Cooper led a squadron of stealth ships on reconnaissance missions around the Imperial defense platforms. His job was to find weaknesses in the fortress system that had protected the Empire for centuries. "Sir," his sensor officer reported, "I'm detecting something strange about the third platform. Its shield generators are running at reduced power." Cooper studied the readings. "Sabotage? Possibly, sir. Or maybe just equipment failure. Those platforms are over 200 years old." Cooper smiled. The Empire's greatest strength had always been their advanced technology. But their greatest weakness was that they had relied on the same technology for too long. They had stopped innovating, stopped improving, stopped adapting. Meanwhile, liberation forces had been forced to innovate constantly. They had learned to fight with whatever ships they could build, whatever weapons they could find, whatever tactics worked. They had become experts at making the impossible work. Captain Luke Davis commanded a strike force of fast attack ships. His mission was to test the Imperial defenses and look for opportunities to break through. "All ships," Davis ordered, "execute probe pattern 7. Hit them fast and hard, then get out before they can respond." The attack ships swept in toward the defense platforms like a swarm of angry insects. They fired their weapons, tested the platform's responses, and vanished before the Imperial gunners could target them effectively. "Interesting," Davis reported to Morrison. "Their defensive fire is slower than our intelligence estimated, and their coordination between platforms is poor." Morrison studied the battle reports. The Empire's defenses were strong, but they were designed to fight conventional enemies using conventional tactics. Liberation forces had learned to be anything but conventional. When the 48-hour deadline arrived, Emperor Zarthak had not responded to Morrison's ultimatum. The Liberation fleet prepared for the final assault. But before the attack could begin, something unexpected happened. A message came from the Imperial Command Center, but it was not from the Emperor. "This is Admiral Vextar of the Imperial Navy," the transmission began. "I am speaking for the Imperial Defense Force. We have decided that this war has gone on long enough." Morrison stared at the screen. Vextar looked tired and defeated, but also relieved. "Admiral Morrison," Vextar continued, "the Imperial fleet surrenders. We will not fight a battle that can only end in pointless destruction. The Emperor has been relieved of command. I am prepared to discuss terms." The surrender of the Imperial Navy marked the end of 3 centuries of galactic tyranny. Within hours, defense platforms powered down their weapons. Imperial ships lowered their shields. The fortress world that had seemed impregnable opened its doors to liberation forces. Morrison met with Vexatar aboard a neutral station between the two fleets. The Imperial Admiral looked older than his years, worn down by months of fighting a war he had gradually realized was wrong. "Admiral Morrison," Vextar said, "I want you to know that this was not an easy decision for me. I have served the Empire all my life." "I understand," Morrison replied. "But sometimes serving your conscience is more important than serving your government." "What happens now?" "Now we rebuild. Every species gets to choose its own future. No more empires. No more conquered worlds. Just free peoples making their own decisions." The formal surrender ceremony took place on Zarthak Prime itself. Representatives from hundreds of species watched as the Empire officially disbanded itself. The document was simple but historic. The Empire renounced all claims to authority over member species and recognized the right of all intelligent beings to self-determination. Admiral Morrison's final log entry became one of the most famous documents in galactic history. "We came here to fight for our survival. We stayed to fight for our principles. We won because we never forgot that some things are worth dying for, and that sometimes the willingness to die for something is exactly what keeps you alive. The war is over. The empire is finished. But our work is just beginning. Today we start building something new. Not another empire, but a community of free worlds. A place where every species can reach for the stars without fear. To all the humans who fought and died in this war, your sacrifice was not in vain. To all the aliens who joined our cause, welcome to freedom. To future generations who will inherit the galaxy we fought to free, remember that liberty is never guaranteed. It must be earned again by each generation. The stars belong to everyone now. What we do with them is up to us. The Galactic Liberation Council was established with its headquarters on Earth, not because humans wanted to rule the galaxy, but because they had proven they could be trusted with the responsibility of protecting freedom. Former imperial worlds became independent republics. The Empire's vast military machine was converted to exploration and colonization efforts. Instead of building weapons of war, the galaxy's shipyards began constructing